If you want to go back to 9/11, the movie, and what you covered in the episode of the Pentagon B movie, and talk about that, I thought that was interesting.
Right. Well, okay. I'll have to give the hat tip to Gray McQueen, who is a professor who has written a book about anthrax that I've talked to him about that before, and he's written a number of articles, scholarly articles for the Journal of 9/11 Studies, etc. One of which, as you say, the Pentagon's B movie, looking at the sort of crossover between 9/11 and Hollywood, and there are a number of different ways that you can approach that. I mean, for example. Tom Clancy and others have talked about. Tom Clancy, for example, wrote a novel about a was it a terror attack, flying a plane into the World Trade Center or into a building in New York, something along those lines. So people came to him afterwards. Well, how did you possibly know that was going to happen? And he said, well, it's an idea that's been out there. The Lone Gunman television pilot people might have seen that was about hijacking an airplane via remote control in order to fly it into the World Trade Center that took place 6 months before 9/11, et cetera, et cetera. And there are a number of times when in movies where the World Trade Center is struck or things along those lines. So there's that kind of level of crossover, but there's a deeper connection there, which I think Gray McQueen was gesturing at, which is the essentially filmic nature of 9/11. That 9/11 was constructed to play out like a Hollywood movie. And that's why you see over and over and over and over and over again in the testimony from people from that day, the firefighters and other people who were interviewed on that day, it was like something out of a movie. It was like something out of a movie. They keep saying that over and over and over because that is the way that we, of course, how else would you conceptualize these incredible dramatic events that you couldn't even comprehend, that you'd never seen anything like this before? It's like something out of a movie. I've seen this before. I've seen it on the big screen. And so the implication is that, of course, the terrorists, of course, knew and planned that in that way. Of course, the first plane strikes and people are just like, what's going on? Is that an accident? And as they're watching, the second plane strikes and it struck. And then there's planes going down over here and over there. And the Pentagon's been hit. And it's like an unfolding story. Precisely because it would achieve the most terror that way. The only question then is, who are the terrorists? And I think if people want to dive down that particular rabbit hole, I did just recently complete a 5.5-hour documentary on Al-Qaeda and the history of Al-Qaeda that they can go to at corbettreport.com/Al-Qaeda, Alqaeda, if they want to get more information on who is Al-Qaeda and what really happened that day. But I think the point stands. Even if you do just swallow the entire Al-Qaeda narrative hook, line, and sinker, yes, of course, they're terrorists. They're trying to terrorize the public. They were doing it in a way that would have the most resonance, that would stick in people's mind, that would be this unfolding spectacle that would draw people's attention. That was obviously part of the plan.
Yeah, and you mentioned in your episode about that RAND document, talking about how the media is almost complicit in terrorist attacks when they talk about them. It can, lead to more and inspire more terrorists. I'm not sure. Do you read the whole thing, or was it just that sort of?
I did, but it's been a few months now, so I won't be able to quote it chapter and verse. But I did link it up in the show notes. And yes, essentially, I think part of the point is that the terrorists have a sort of symbiotic relationship with the media, because again, fundamentally, terrorism is about media. That is what it is about. It's about getting the information out to the media. If a terror attack happens in the forest and no one's there to see it, does it really happen? Something along those lines. No, it has to be broadcast. People have to see this and hear about it and hear about the horror. That's the resonance that terror has, and that's why it can be an effective political weapon. And so, of course, the terrorists need the media. And to a certain extent, maybe the media need the terrorists. Well, they need something to report on anyway. And hey, this is a good business. So there is a symbiotic relationship that goes on there. Again, however you understand or conceptualize who the terrorists are.
Yeah, the same as if someone takes someone hostage, or the terrorists, they have that grainy video that goes on the media with the white cards of their demands. So obviously they need the media to send out that fear into the people to make the government act and give in to their demands and all of that. And you started the episode with the Syrian missile flying over and I think it was MSNBC talking about it. Why do you think they televise things like that, especially with the Iraq shock and awe campaign, where you can see obviously the fire, and you think, when the people turn around and be like, this is pretty brutal. Look, look at these explosions. There's people there being killed, and we're watching it on TV like it's a film.
Yeah.
What purpose is it? A psychological purpose to normalize the scenes of war, so the next time it comes, no one's really surprised, or maybe something on the side?
There are a lot of profound points actually to a question like that, because it gets to the heart of what news is, or the way that we conceptualize news in this particular era anyway, because that was one of the things that I did in my history of the mass media course is, in this era, what was the news? What was it? And how was it expressed? And how did people understand it? So, for example, of course, pre-Gutenberg, pre-movable type printing press, the idea of a daily compendium of news from your local community, from the broader region, being somehow compiled and then, it couldn't be printed, so it would have to be handwritten and then distributed to people. No, I mean, there's town criers for important announcements, or, if the king makes a proclamation, someone will read it out to the town or something like that. But there's no concept of news as we understand it today. That, of course, starts to develop with the printing press, and then you start to get things that I guess we could kind of call newspapers, but even then they're kind of not newspapers as we know them, and that starts to develop. And then eventually you arrive at something like our conception of news, a daily compendium of things that happen today that you should know about, that could be delivered to your doorstep and read. So you got that conception of news. But then, with the advent of radio and television, and then satellite TV, and then you've got CNN. And let's keep in mind, it was only, I don't know what year it officially launched, but it was around 1990 that CNN really started to become a thing. 24/7 news all the time. And every moment of the day, you could turn it on and they're reporting the news as it's happening to that very second. And that idea, again, completely foreign to a generation or two ago. What do you mean, 24/7, nothing but news? This is what's happening. I'm standing in the middle of Paris and nothing is happening right now, but I'll be here later. It doesn't make sense. Except CNN, the launch of CNN and the Gulf War went together. The first Gulf War was a CNN event. And I remember, actually, from my childhood, I was an elementary school student, but I remember watching on CNN and what's the latest update and what's happening now. And look, here's a grainy picture of something that will tell you was an explosion. And oh, look, and now we're going to the UN, and look at this little girl talking about babies being thrown from incubators and other such things. So there is some sort of relationship between the idea of 24/7 news, and you need to know everything that's happening right up to the moment, and these grand emergencies like war, like a coronavirus pandemic. Oh my God, it's killing people left, right, and center. We need to know what's happening right now. So the 24/7 news aspect of it is, again, I think this is incredibly important for us to ponder why we think that our conception of what the news is the news. This isn't some idea that's written in the stars, and it changes from generation to generation. And we just need a little bit of historical perspective in order to understand that. And I have become so long-winded, I forgot what your original question was, but I know it had something to do with 24/7.
It was about the Iraq campaign being sort of a televised event of the bombings, and to your original first part of the episode about the Syrian missile, and he's quoting that poet, and it's crazy.
So the concept of a war that's unfolding, and what do you show at every moment of every day while this war is happening? Of course, you've got to show the missiles launching. That is that is probably the number one thing you want to show on the news, because it's actually something that you can see and you can conceptualize and you can frame in one single television shot. That's the money shot. There you go. There's missiles flying. They're going to go, and it's the perfect shot because you get to see the beauty of our weapons, or whatever Brian Williams was saying. You get to see it going, and it does. It looks, amazing. And obviously it's some sort of technological wonder, and you could compare it to fireworks or whatever. And you don't get to see the people being exploded into a million bits on the other end of it, the little children and babies and and mothers that are dying at the other end of that. You just see them streaking off into the sky, and it's all very poetic, and you can wax poetic about it. So that, again, there's I think Neil Postman would have an awful lot to say about this, and if people haven't read some of his iconic work on the subject of the media, they absolutely should. But he would, I think, very much argue that yes, that is what war is on television. It is the shots of the missiles streaking across the sky or something like that, and then just endless shots and endless banter of meaningless, completely contentless commentary by the Brian Williams and whatever Pentagon stooge has on to talk about these scenes, because it doesn't matter what they're saying. It matters what they're showing and sort of the underlying subconscious ideas that people are taking away from that. And I guess we could even go one step further philosophically and start talking about Baudrillard? No. Yes. What? Yes, Baudrillard. The Gulf War didn't happen? That was Baudrillard, right? Am I making that?
I have no idea.
I know it was the French guy. I'm sure it was Baudrillard. Anyway, I covered this in my questions for Corbett, actually, about media. So people should definitely check that out because it's fascinating. His thesis was that the Gulf War did not take place. It was a television event. Yes, it didn't mean there wasn't actual guns happening and things like this, but fundamentally what that was a television event. It was a spectacle to be viewed and to be framed by these Pentagon spokesmen and people like this. This is the way we understood it. This is the way we conceptualized what war even is. Because if you look back at the first Gulf War, essentially it was a couple of days of something approaching kinetic military action and a bunch of people surrendering. It's not even a war. I mean, what was the war aspect of it? Who was fighting back? I mean, maybe a few servicemen died, maybe. That wasn't a war, but it was a war in the minds of the public because it said on CNN, and they had a title graphic and intro music and whatever else they had, and it was 24/7 coverage of it. Of course it's a war. Don't you see it's happening on TV? So I think even our conception of how we interpret events that are happening are, of course, mediated through the media.